Matthews for the selection. Amen. Pastor Jones for the prayer on this I know this is can't forward. We gotta have some believers in the house. There ought to be a few. Is there any believers in the house? Amen. That's why we're here tonight. This is Bible says the redeemed of the Lord say something. So we have gathered. We're super excited once again to be here. Already invited, welcome. We want to welcome once again our candidates. We're so glad to spend some time tonight. Your real busy schedules as you get closer to that date. So again, on behalf of the entire Baptist Pastors Conference, we say thank you for taking some time. Let's see. Let me do this here. I want to announce today. We're going to get started. Let's do this. Let's get some house rules. We are in God's house, and we believe in doing things in decency and in order. So what that means is, I just want to share this with you. As we get in further into this morning, I've seen some things on the news. I've seen what can happen. I know it's not going to happen loud out of the I know it's going to do that. No one's going to get up and call one of these guys out of the name and tell them this or that. I know we're not going to do that. This is God's house, and we want to be respectful of that. Amen. Amen. Now, so we're asking you to get your cell phones, put them on silent, and just be respectful. No loud outbursts. These gentlemen are presenting to us. Let's show all much respect. Now, just in case someone sitting next to you decides to give a loud outburst, right? Just in case they decide to call one of the guys out of their name. We have Sergeant Finch. Everybody look this way, if you will, please. Amen. Take a good look. That's Sergeant Finch from Omaha Police Department. He's here to listen, but he's also to make sure there's order. So I'm being honest, we're not going to tolerate anything more. You get one opportunity, and he's going to come get you. That's the worst job. Is everybody clear? Amen. We want to have a good time tonight. We want to be respectful and give reverence to where we're at tonight. That's house rule 1. House rule 2. You're going to be given a chance to ask questions tonight toward the latter part of the presentation. And so when you came in tonight, you should have received a question card. And so what I would like to do when you get ready is to tell you who you would like the question for. You just circle that. What your question is, and that's option. When you get done with your question, all you have to do is raise your hand. Reverend James Hallgrove III, would you please stand? Sister Alexis McGarry, would you please stand? They will be positioned toward the back of the church. So when they see your hand go, so I'm going to have Sister McGarry and Sister Hallgrove and Brother Hallgrove, y'all got to take position toward the back of the church. So that way, all you have to do tonight is just put your hand up. When you put your hand up, they'll know to come get your card. And then when it's time for the audience questions, we'll begin to ask those questions. Please know that with the amount of group here tonight, the question we may receive, we may not answer your question all tonight. We will do our very best to get your question answered. And if you do not, please understand, it's not because we didn't want to. We just have these gentlemen to 8:30. Amen. We want to be respectful of their time on tonight. With that being said, on tonight, we're going to introduce our moderator. Amen. We have a moderator, y'all. Amen. And the moderator is no stranger to those in Omaha, Nebraska. Her name is Dr. Carol Mitchell, and she is the right person for the job tonight. Now, I'm going to read you a few of her qualifications on tonight to know that she is top-notch, one of the best in the city that we could get. She's a member of the National Baptist Convention of Congress for Christian Education. She's the coordinator of the National Think Book. She is also a faculty member of the National Baptist Congress of Christian Education. She is a member of the New Era Baptist State Convention of Nebraska, where she's currently serves as our scholarship director. She is a proud member of the Morning Star Baptist Church, where she teaches adult Sunday school. She has been a practicing educator for over 50 years. She has been a teacher, she has been a supervisor, director, and a professor. She's taught on every level imaginable possible. She is also a professor emeritus, College of Education in the STEM program. She is also part of the Oxford Roundtable as a presenter and member out of Oxford, England, and she is a published author. She is a child of God. She's well respected in our community. She is a true professional, and I believe we got the right person tonight to handle the moderator. So again, with much love, we're so happy to have our moderator. Do me a favor, everybody, let's receive our moderator, Dr. Carol Mitchell, with a great round of applause. Come on, you do a little better than that. Amen. All over Dr. Mitchell. Oh, I got to stand over. Turn around, Dr. Mitchell. Amen. Turn around. Let's see. You got to see it, Dr. Mitchell. Amen. We're down in Dr. Mitchell's hands. Amen. Tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just to reiterate what Pastor Page has already said, the ushers will assist you to your seats. All of you are expected, it is expected that we would have respectful behavior. Please turn your phones off or put them in the silent mode. Raise your hand if need be to be recognized, and Minister Hawthorne and Sister McGarry will be with you. We're going to ask the questions for the specific candidate that you have that circle the name on the form as you've been told. The timer for this evening is Minister Scales, who is sitting to my right when my back is to you. And now I'd like to introduce the panel of candidates, and they are in alpha order. Mr. Greg Gonzalez, Mr. Aaron Hanson, Mr. Wayne Hudson, and Mr. George Merrithew. Okay. Gentlemen, I'm going to take my seat now. We want each of you candidates to give your opening statement. Each of you has 2 minutes. And in the comments that you've made, we would like for you to focus on family, faith, and character, in addition to whatever you want to say. 2 minutes, beginning now with Mr. Greg Gonzalez.
Well, thank you, pastors and clergy and everybody for the invite tonight. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Greg Gonzalez. I'm a 28-year law enforcement veteran. I'm born and raised in South Omaha and come from a family of 6. I'm a devout Catholic, a married family of 3. My wife's in law enforcement. Come from a long history of law enforcement in the Omaha Police Department. But a little bit about me, aside from my family, and I have some cousins here that were former police officers, is that I started my career at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. I had my degree from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, but I spent a long time in law enforcement, and I recently retired. I spent half my career working violent crime, and I spent my second half in management, very involved in the community, but my biggest accomplishments for transparency in law enforcement have been bringing body cameras to the city of Omaha, hiring over 450 police officers, managing a $57 million budget, and at times being the acting chief of police, managing over 900 police officers. So you can rest assured I have the executive experience for this position. More importantly, I have my master's degree in public administration, and I'm very involved in community policing. That's what I feel the pillar of law enforcement is today for police community relations. Co-founder of our Police Athletic League, where we have over 6,000 youth involved in athletics, but it's more than that. It's really about family, north to south. But I'm excited to be here today to talk about my accomplishments. And again, thank you for your time, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And now, Mr. Aaron Hanson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for welcoming me into your house of worship. It means a lot. I had an event for my 11-year-old son tonight. It's his choir recital. He gave me permission to come attend this. I told him how important it was to the congregation. Pastor Williams made it very clear how important it was, so I felt it was important to attend, despite the fact I'd love to be watching my 11-year-old singing right now. My name is Aaron Hanson. I'm currently a sergeant on the Omaha Police Department. Born and raised in Omaha and Douglas County. I have 4 children. My wife is a nurse, and I grew up originally at 44th and F Street until approximately age 10. My dad moved us to Texas for a few years, and we moved back, and he bought a place in the Florence-Ponca Hills neighborhood, where I attended Nathan Hale Junior High and graduated from North High School. I attended University of Nebraska, Omaha. I did not graduate because I was hired by the Omaha Police Department. I fell in love with the service to my community as a sworn peace officer for OPD. My assignments include the Uniform Patrol Bureau. I spent 14 years on the K-9 unit. I spent many years as a gang unit supervisor. Currently, I'm the supervisor for the fugitive unit. I've spent 6 years as president of the Omaha Police Officer Association. And one thing I'm most passionate about is the position I just stepped back from, volunteer executive director for the Nebraska Center for Workforce Development and Education. That's a nonprofit that is focused on redirecting challenged young people or traditional high school students and junior high students into the skilled trades to help try to break cycles of poverty and create new generational wealth in our community. Thank you for your welcome here. I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Now, Mr. Wayne Hudson.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this event today. First of all, I want to thank God from whom all my blessings flow. If I had 1,000 tongues in 1,000 years, I cannot thank him enough for all that he's done for me and my family. I am Wayne Hudson. I am the current Chief Deputy Sheriff with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. I have been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years. I have either worked, supervised, or managed every position within my agency. I was born right here in this community. I graduated from Northwest High School, where I joined the United States Air Force and honorably served from 1986 to 1992. I joined the Douglas County Sheriff's Office in 1994, and I can tell you now, it was not easy. At that time, I was just one of 4 African Americans on my agency. Diversity and inclusion was never a thought at that time. I was then, and I'm still now, the type of law enforcement officer that felt that we, because of the position we hold, should be held to a higher standard, a standard of a guardian of our community and not of an oppressor. This stands with me at odds with some of my agency. Through it all, God was at my side. Before you today is someone in this community that honorably served his country, earned a bachelor's and a master's degree, and has the distinction of being the first and highest ranking African-American sheriff in the state of Nebraska. I am now seeking the highest law enforcement position in Douglas County, that of Douglas County Sheriff. I'm doing so because I love this community and I love this professional law enforcement. And I want to continue to be that bridge builder between the two. I am married 25 years to my wife Jennifer, who's here today. We have 3 kids, and I am a member of Salem Baptist Church, and my family church home is St. Mark Baptist Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Now, Mr. George Merrithew.
Aye. Okay, it's working. Got to have at least one technical difficulty in the night. My name is George Merrithew. I'm from Grand Island, Nebraska, where I was born and went to school. Grew up in a little town called Chapman, just outside of Grand Island, with 9 brothers and sisters. Grew up Catholic, very Catholic and very spiritual growing up. We spent a lot of time with the St. Mary's Catholic Church in Grand Island, which almost all of my brothers and sisters have been married at, and most of our children have been baptized at, including my 13-year-old son. My wife isn't here tonight, but she's babysitting our godson and his 2 little brothers while their parents are out of town house hunting. So I enlisted in the United States Army Reserve when I was 17, and I am still currently in the United States Army Reserve. Rose through the rank from E1 to E7, so I learned how to work and supervise and run soldiers fairly early, long before I came on the Omaha Police Department. When I came on the Omaha Police Department, I had just graduated from law school and was a judge advocate, and I've risen to the ranks of Lieutenant Colonel in the Army Reserves. I do have my bachelor's degree, got that from Hastings College, a good Presbyterian school center of the state, and went to Creighton Law School to get my degree. I spent 25 years with the Omaha Police Department. I started in uniform patrol, worked there as an officer for 6 years, and then went up to lieutenant, to sergeant, and then I was moved into the Criminal Investigations Bureau. I worked there for a number of years until I was promoted to lieutenant, went back to uniform patrol for a year, and then came back in as the administrative lieutenant to the chiefs and deputy chiefs. So I've worked at the highest echelons of the police department and advised leaders. That's what I did in the military, and that gives me a very well-rounded background in law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. And now, gentlemen, we will begin our round of questions, and each of you will have 3 minutes to respond. I will again begin in alpha order. The first question to each of you is, what qualifies you to hold the office and do a good job? Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, thank you for that question. I talked a little bit about my background earlier. I've been in law enforcement 28 years, and I started my career as a deputy sheriff with Douglas County right out of college, and so I'm the only candidate that has worn both the brown uniform and the blue uniform, so I'm very familiar with the terrain of the sheriff's office. I'm very familiar with management. I started as a street officer, probably like most of my colleagues here, and then rose the ranks. And I think it's important in this position to understand the dynamics of policing in the 21st century. So to do that, it's very important to punch your ticket, as they say. So I rose the ranks from officer to sergeant to lieutenant to captain to assistant chief, and I spent 9 years as a deputy police chief. And I've had various assignments throughout my career. And so as a leader, you have to make very difficult decisions at times, and I think that's what qualifies me. I'm very unique in that position because I've been on both sides of the coin. Fighting violent crime, fighting for equality, fighting for inclusion, and also making sure that I had the intestinal fortitude to make tough decisions when we needed to with our officers. Part of my responsibility was training and recruitment, and I'm very proud of the fact that one of the issues at the Sheriff's Office is they're hemorrhaging a little bit with diversity and training. I've hired over 450 police officers in the most diverse and largest classes in the history of this city, and I'm very proud of that. I'm also very proud of the fact that budget is very important. So you have to make sure you're within your budget, and if you're not within your budget, like some departments, and that's not good for the taxpayers, especially when you lose deputies at a rate, because eventually the taxpayers absorb that cost, and everybody in this room pays taxes in Douglas County. So my management experience obviously qualifies me, and it's very important for me to make sure that as a leader, I can make those decisions. And the other piece of that is, I'm proud of saying 28 years of law enforcement, I've never even had a reprimand on this job. So I think it'd be hard pressed to find an officer that's worked violent crime, that's been a leader in law enforcement, has never even had a reprimand or suspension. And I'm proud of that, not because I haven't been in some situations on the street, but because if you do good work and you arrest people, and some bad people go to jail, you do it with humility and respect. And at the end of the day, people understand that. So I'm here to say that I punched my ticket. I've earned my spot, like some of my colleagues up here, to apply for this position, and I look forward to earning your vote. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Hanson, do you want me to repeat the question?
Sure, if you would.
Okay. What qualifies you to hold office and do a good job?
Sure, great question. I'm passionate about this industry. I'm passionate about our community, and I'm passionate about true problem solving. My career path has admittedly been different than the three very distinguished gentlemen up here at the front table with me. My career has focused on working on street level problem solving, violence prevention, and really trying to implement the police chief and the mayor's vision when it comes to actually reducing and disrupting violent crime trends. And I value that experience because in that position, as a frontline supervisor, dealing with the challenges that we face today, whether it be cycles of poverty, whether it be cycles of violence, and actually having to problem solve those issues, not only trying to implement a police chief's vision, but actually communicating those observations and those experiences back to the chief in order to make appropriate leadership and management decisions for a better outcome. That's valuable. I think everybody up and down the chain of the police department is a valuable component. But what I think also sets me apart and what makes me different is that when the chief challenged the middle managers, when the chief challenged the frontline supervisors to try to not only prevent violent crime today, but to find solutions to prevent crime and disrupt poverty challenges tomorrow, I took that challenge very literally. And I decided that without much fanfare, that I would volunteer my off-duty time with a nonprofit organization that works with many different people in the community, business, labor, education, government, to try to fill those gaps that I have observed too many young people struggling in. The young people that I have seen, that I have known since, in many cases, since they were 12 years old, and unfortunately too many of those young people that I have had to stand over as they took their last breath. That impacts me not only as a police professional, but as a dad and as a person. So I hold that very, very dear to me. And so what I started to become passionate about is how can we truly problem solve the issues that we see in our community, all across our community, North Omaha, South Omaha, West Omaha, rural Douglas County. Many of the problems are similar. There are disparities in certain communities, but many of the problems are similar. And that is, are we truly helping young people or people from a challenged background to be successful in life, whether that be as a successful parent or whether that be in the labor market, to truly disrupt cycles of poverty, cycles of crime, and help people to have stronger families. And the good news is this: I've seen it work. I've actually mentored young people from my community that have been shot a few years ago and today are skilled tradesmen. I've seen people progress from a problematic lifestyle to become a plumber's apprentice. That's the type of creative problem solving that we need to truly attain long-term solutions. And I promise you, that's the type of problem solving and leadership you will get with Aaron Hanson as your sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Now, Mr. Hudson, what qualifies you to hold office and do a good job?
That is a very good question, and the simple answer to that question is, I'm doing it now, okay? I am the Chief Deputy Sheriff. I run the day-to-day operations of the Sheriff's Office. I'm just gonna give you a little breakdown of the Sheriff's Office. We have approximately 220 employees, 140 of those are sworn. We have about our patrol population, which is outside of any incorporated area. Our patrol population is about 90,000 population, okay? We have 6 bureaus. Each bureau is headed up by a captain. The 6th bureau is headed up by a lab director. They all report directly to me. We are CLIA accredited, which means we meet a national standard. We've been accredited since 2016. We have the highest rating of any agency. Only 3% of agencies across the nation have the same rating that we have. We are duly accredited through our crime lab and our crime scene investigators. Again, I run the day-to-day operations of the Sheriff's Office with my captains and with Sheriff Wheeler. We have a $20 million budget. But to go into a little bit more detail, what I've done is, let me back up 1 second. 26 years that I've been in this department, we're talking about budgets. We have always come in on budget. We have never come in over budget in 26 years. Very few agencies in government can say that, 26 years. But what I did was, I went out and asked the community, what do you want to see in your next sheriff? What qualities do you want your next sheriff to have? And what they told me was, they wanted someone that's honest, someone that has integrity, and a professional law enforcement executive. Honesty and integrity, those are self-explanatory. But when they broke it down, as far as professional executive, they said, we want someone that's educated. I have my bachelor's and my master's. They said they want someone with training, quality training. I have been through some of the best management schools that we've had, including the FBI National Academy. They said they want someone with command experience. A command officer is an individual at the rank of captain and above. I've done it. I am the chief deputy sheriff. Been a captain or chief for 10 years now. But most of all, they said they want someone that's connected with the community. I spend hundreds of hours giving back to the community. Because I know, if we're going to turn this cycle around of violence in our community, we as law enforcement executive, we have to be intentional about making connections with all parts of our community, not just Western Douglas County, all parts of our community. And I've done that. Again, back to your question, how do I know we're successful? Recently, we had a survey done by UNO. We want to know how we're doing. 96% in certain categories saying that we're doing an excellent job. 96%. The other measure is, will people report crime to a law enforcement agency? That lets you know if they trust that agency. 94% said they will or either they will or ensure will tell us if there's a crime going on in their community. That's trust. That's legitimacy. That's what I've done, and that's what I'll carry on doing as your next Douglas County Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And now, Mr. George Merrithew, what qualities you hold, and what qualities do you hold for this office and in order to do a good job? Mr. Merrithew.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question. I am, as Wayne pointed out, I'm highly educated and worked at the highest echelons of the police department. I'm a lieutenant, so I wasn't the commander at the captain level, but what I did was write all the policies and advise. So the vision statement for the Omaha Police Department hasn't changed since I was hired back in 1996. It's the exact same vision. However, every chief puts his own spin on it. The last two chiefs, I helped them do that because they respected my position and my training as a counselor, as a judge advocate in the military, and as a lawyer to be able to assist them in perfecting that vision. And I wrote the policies that supported it. The Omaha Policies and Procedures Manual, I designed that, I wrote it, I authored it, had a lot of help, including Mr. Hanson, Chief Gonzalez. We worked on all of those issues to make sure that the rank and file understood them. We developed tools. I implemented the limited English proficiency policy, which was a Department of Justice mandated policy that had kind of fallen by the wayside when Chief Hayes brought me up as one of the first things I had to do. That particular policy, after I got it written, got it approved by the Department of Justice, I went out and trained every officer in the police department on that policy and then made sure the tools were available to all of them. Sergeant Hanson, then Officer Hanson even contacted me and told me how great it was because he had the ability to reach out and interpret and talk to people who couldn't speak English. And it's a tool that every law enforcement officer was able to do. And we were very successful in implementing those types of programs. Worked very hard on the body-worn camera and accountability program to make sure that policy was written, helped get that approved by the Department of Justice. So I'm very comfortable on working the issues and bringing them in. I did spend 6 years in uniform patrol, responding to calls, answering calls. Spent some time in the Criminal Investigations Bureau. I was one of the first teams through the door at Von Mar. Actually, the third fire team that went in. So I've knocked through doors and gone into the dangerous situations. Now I've also been in the military for 38 years, and Chief Gonzalez had a little bit wrong. I've worn the blue. I kind of wear a brown, but it's more camouflage. So I've worn different kinds of uniforms as well. So the military has given me a chance to go all over the world. Eastern and Western Europe. I've been to the Orient and in Korea. I've seen how other people do things, and I always explore those communities when I get a chance to. And that's opened my eyes and allows me to see how other communities and other people work. And that's something that I bring that's kind of unusual in that I've experienced a lot of different nationalities and a lot of different religions. I've had a lot of training on that with the military and have trained a lot of people on that. I was an instructor. I notice this is one area you haven't instructed. I instructed basic trainees and initial trainees in the United States military. So I've been teaching for a lot of years, so I understand that aspect of it. And what uniquely qualifies me, I have the highest level of education of anyone in this panel. I have a doctorate degree. I have my bachelor's degree. I have more leadership courses than the police department's ever heard of through the military. I've gone through all of the different training there, and I'm a graduate of the Command and General Staff College. So I understand how to put all that to use and how to implement that to the rank and file to make sure that they're following those visions that I helped create.
Thank you, Mr. Merrithew. And now, gentlemen, we go to question number 2. How would you enhance the visibility of the County Sheriff's Office in North and South Omaha? Again, how would you enhance the visibility of the County Sheriff's Office in North and South Omaha? Mr. Gonzalez.
Sorry about that. All right, well, that's one of the questions that come up when I knock doors. We knocked over 24,000 doors. And I can tell you, a lot of people will ask what the sheriff does and what does the sheriff's office do. So I think there's been a little bit of movement on that position. Part of it is you have to have a community outreach team. I've talked about this before. You can't have one deputy that is doing community outreach. You have to have a team of deputies that's their full-time job. And so I think it's top down. I think it starts from the sheriff. We talked a little bit about forums like this. How do you really get embedded in the community? So your deputies all the way up to the sheriff really should be out of their cars, community policing. And so one of the biggest things that come out of a recent report out of major city mayors was to move the needle forward on law enforcement. It really, in community engagement, really starts with community engagement. It shouldn't. Community policing should not be a program, but it should be a philosophy. In other words, that should be part of your corporate culture every day. So when we talk about outreach, community meetings, whether it's a bike rodeo, town hall meetings, people have to be accessible, including your sheriff, right? I worked homicide. I was a homicide sergeant for years. I worked 24/7. Everybody knew my number. Get called 24/7. And I would expect that as your sheriff, somebody should be in a position to return your phone call. And so you need to be accessible, number one. And you have to have an open door policy, and you have to have open lines of communication. And so if we can't get out in the community, and that doesn't mean just the unincorporated areas of this county. Douglas County has jurisdiction, folks, county-wide. So when we talk about violent crime and addressing violent crime, that impacts north, south, east, west, working with our community leaders, working with our clergy folks, working with everybody. That way everybody understands what that brown uniform means. And I can tell you this, when I was a deputy, we worked in neighborhoods. And that's part of the issue today. We have to have cops and deputies working neighborhoods so you know who your patrol district officer is. So thank you for that. It's a very important question.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson, how would you enhance the visibility of the County Sheriff's Office in North and South Omaha?
Great question. So obviously, just like Chief Gonzalez had mentioned, that the typical template for patrol responsibilities for the Douglas County Sheriff's Office is unincorporated Douglas County. And the Sheriff's Office is responsible for primary patrol duty, jurisdiction, as well as criminal investigation in areas outside of incorporated city of Omaha or other small communities in the western part of the county. But I think just as Chief Gonzalez mentioned also, that communication is key. Unlike other law enforcement executive positions in the community, sheriffs don't, or rather they shouldn't, have to take a pause to wonder what their boss is going to say about them being honest or transparent or communicative with the community, because their only boss is the community. They don't have to worry about upsetting a city council or a county board or a mayor. The sheriff truly is responsible and has to be transparent with the community. Now, I don't think the sheriff's office needs to necessarily duplicate the services of the Omaha Police Department within the city limits of Omaha. I think the Omaha Police Department does a fine job of that, and absolutely the sheriff's office should be present at community events to make positive contacts with the community. But my vision in terms of the enhanced interaction and enhanced service to the community, and especially South and North Omaha, is that we need to fill the gap of where we are missing in Nebraska. In Nebraska, there really is no sworn peace officer that has the jurisdiction over supervision of people in the community that are under the jurisdiction or under the supervision of the court or under county supervision in terms of pretrial release. And when I'm sheriff, I'm going to create a specialized working group of deputies. They're going to fill that niche just like they do in almost every other state around Nebraska, in order not only to make sure that these individuals do not reoffend, but in order to help them actually rehabilitate. Because when people with challenges know that someone may be coming around to make sure they're staying where they say they stay, or working, or staying sober, that's that positive influence that a lot of us needed from our parents. And so I think that approach is really going to give us big inroads, both in crime reduction for safety, but also in rehabilitation.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Hudson, how would you enhance the visibility of the County Sheriff's Office in North and South Omaha?
Very good question, and my answer to that is to do more than what we're doing right now. When I first became the captain of patrol, our community engagement was mainly concentrated on western Douglas County, okay? Well, we can't do that. We are Douglas County Sheriff's Office, so we should be out throughout Douglas County. So I enhanced that. For the first time, when I took over, we did Juneteenth parade. We did Cinco de Mayo. We started getting out and about in the community. We started recruiting from the community. We contacted churches. We put advertising on buses. We wanted people to know that the sheriff department is open. Now, Mr. Gonzalez mentioned having a community outreach team. That's an excellent idea. We already have that. We have a community outreach team. We were just out this weekend, and that's what we do. They're individuals who are trained. They have their full-time job, but they're also trained on community engagement and getting out and about in the community. And we have that. And we're going to do more of that. Because if we want to be reflective as far as employment on the sheriff's office, then we have to open up our doors and let people know who we are. I'm also a member of the 100 Black Men, and I'm a firm believer in this, especially when it comes to our young kids. The motto of the 100 Black Men is, what they see is what they'll be. So what do I do on the weekends? I put all kind of gear in my car, and I ride around, I put that uniform on, and I go out throughout North and South Omaha. Why do I do that? Because I want our young kids to see a positive, especially African-American male, in that uniform. I want them to run to me and not run from me. That's the only way we're going to change this community. So that's what I do. Positive images, positive influence, and what will I do in the future? It's going to be woven into the fabric of the sheriff's office. It'll be part of the culture of the sheriff's office. If you want certain positions, if you want certain things on the sheriff's office, you will have to tell me what type of community engagement are you doing in this community? Not in Avoca, Iowa, not in other places. This community that pays you your paycheck, and not with your family members. This community. That's what you have to do. we're starting to go that route, down that road now, and we're gonna do even more as your next Dutchess County Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Mr. Merrithew, the same question. How would you enhance the visibility of the County Sheriff's Office in North and South Omaha?
I think to sum that up is inclusivity. And I've always been one that looks at all groups and tries to understand exactly where they're coming from and get their feedback. I'm a member of the Black Police Officers Association. I'm a member of the Latino Police Officers Association. I'm a member of the Nebraska Women in Policing. So I'm a member of all the organizations and have worked with them quite extensively on making sure that minority rights and specialty things are recognized for all of those groups to make sure that they're included and that there are no biases in the testing programs or the selection programs. So I've worked quite a bit on those issues with the Omaha Police Department, and I would bring that experience to the Douglas County Sheriff's Department. But I also really agree with all the speakers. Community engagement is absolutely inherent. You have to be able to reach out and talk to your constituency, to the people who are present within the entire jurisdiction. Keeping up the good work that's been done so far, making sure that we have officers that can engage and be present at larger city events and smaller city events, neighborhood events, making sure that we're at Elkhorn Days, to make sure that we're at Benson Days, to make sure that we're at Juneteenth, make sure we're at Cinco de Mayo. The deputies have been very present at Cinco de Mayo for 5-6 years now. So it's an excellent tool for us to reach out and speak to people, and that's what we need to do. That also applies to the sheriff. The sheriff has to be out amongst the people. He's got to go out. He's got to make sure that people know he's reachable. I would always have a complete open door policy. There would be no problems with anyone getting a hold of me. One of the things I used to do as a judge advocate when I would mobilize and I'd have to train and do wills and powers of attorney and give legal advice on different federal laws for people who are being activated, for soldiers who are being activated. We did a lot of them back around the 9/11 time. One of the things that I always did was give out my cell phone to all of those soldiers and their families so that they had a legal question or a legal issue, they knew how to get a hold of a lawyer. And I would make sure that I continue to do that as the Douglas County Sheriff and making sure that we're reaching out. Now, one thing that I really want to make sure that we do is encouraging the volunteering of the deputies in the communities. PACE, great organization. The Omaha Police Department allows officers to coach on duty to make sure those kids are seeing a positive interaction with those people. I would make sure that program were implemented at Douglas County as well so that we can expand even more upon that great program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merrithew. And now as we move to question number 3, I'm going to begin with Mr. Hanson. And then following for the question 4, I will begin with Mr. Hudson. And for the final question, I will begin with Mr. Merrithew. The question number 3 is, Mr. Hanson and the rest of the gentlemen, how would you improve police-community relations? How would you improve community-police relations?
Great question. By promoting true problem solving and better outcomes for as many people as we possibly can. I know from firsthand experience, both in my role as former president of the Omaha Police Officers Association and as my longtime role as a street-level supervisor in units that have interacted with many areas of the public, but especially with areas that have a lot of frustration, both with police and with poverty and with other challenges, that people want better outcomes. And if we don't focus on better outcomes, then everything else that we do is arguably for naught. Because it doesn't matter what makes me feel good if there is still a disproportionate number of young people in our community living in poverty or not being able to achieve their potential. Now, I know it's possible because although I don't have the level of higher education as the other gentlemen at the front of the table do, I talk to people and I do a lot of research and I study data and I listen. And I've been in a lot of households. And one thing that I know to be true, and one statistic that does not leave me, that I think about it every day, 94% of African American young people in our community who live in a household with 2 involved parents do not live in poverty. That's an amazing statistic. And so how do we achieve that positive outcome for more young people in the African American community, young people in the Latino community, young people in every part of our community? We need to really look back at the core challenges that are really fueling poverty and crime and generational cycles of those poverty and crime. And I think by having those very honest and open conversations with the community and trying to truly identify those true challenges and address them head on, I truly think we can have better outcomes. I've seen it happen myself, and I'm very excited to do it as your sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Hudson, how would you improve police-community relations?
I have a mentor. His name is Kenton Buckner. He is the police chief of Syracuse, New York. And I met him through the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive Chief Mentoring Program, 2-year-long program where he was guiding me on how to become a police chief or sheriff. He has a saying that I love. He says that the public doesn't expect us to be perfect, but they do expect and demand for us to be professional. How we're going to increase police and community relations is very simple. We have to have open and honest communication. We have to. And not just individuals that are law enforcement friendly. We have to get into those places where they're not so friendly to law enforcement. And we have to have those conversations. Otherwise, we're still going to have a segment in part of this community who don't trust law enforcement. When I was out canvassing the other day, I met a young man. I gave him my flyer. He looked at it and said I was running for sheriff. He says, "No, I don't talk to the popo." I said, "Give me 15, 20 minutes. Just let's talk for a little while." We talked for a while, finally got it done. He says, "You know what? You're a little different." I said, "No, I'm not different. There's many of me in the law enforcement. We just have to sit down and have those conversations, is what we have to do." It's hard to dehumanize someone when you're sitting across the table having a conversation. We have individuals in our community right now, they really want to have a say. They want to have a say-so. So how do we do it? We do a lot more community forums. Myself and the gentleman, we go out in barbershops, hair salons, wherever someone will let, churches, wherever they will let us in, and we have those conversations. It has to start from the top too. The other thing that I did was, I didn't like the definition of community policing that's being used, so I wrote my own. And my definition is, community policing or community engagement is an intentional effort on the part of a law enforcement agency to build professional relationships and work closely with members of the community. This is done through positive interactions with the local community, creating partnerships and strategies for reducing crime and disorder and increasing the quality of life for all residents. All residents. We have to have those critical conversations. That's how we break down that barrier between the community and law enforcement. And think about what a wonderful community we would have. Wonderful. As a law enforcement officer, if I'm wrestling around with somebody on the ground, I'm not worried about somebody pulling out a phone and videotaping it. I will get help. That's the kind of community we can have, and we will have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And now, Mr. Marithu, how would you improve police-community relations?
Well, again, the engagement is just a huge So it has to come from an area of professional policing where the deputies understand exactly what that means. One of the things we do in the military is we espouse the Army values, and we do that at every level. Another thing that we do is, especially for officers, when you get promoted, you retake the oath of office. We don't do that in policing. We don't talk about the department values when we get promoted. We don't talk about it on a continuing basis. We have them, but we don't really enforce them and reinforce them throughout a career. The military does that, and over, to make sure that people remember why you're doing the job that you're doing. And it's not just a paycheck. It has to be for the betterment of your community and the betterment of the people that you're serving. So you do that by making sure that you're available, making sure that you're going out to the people, that you're going out and attending community meetings, attending neighborhood watch meetings, attending the large-scale events, making sure that you have at least a monthly engagement where people are invited to come and speak with the sheriff. And that probably should even be weekly, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of good feedback that a sheriff can take and then implement and pass that on. But the other thing that you have to do is empower your officers and your deputies to do that as well, making sure that they know that the top dog, the sheriff, is going to back them up if they say, hey, I need to take an hour of a shift and go to this meeting. Okay, well, we can handle the call load, but it's important that we engage. Now, getting into the other parts of the community that we don't necessarily patrol in. So how do we do that? Well, we do that with partnerships. The Omaha Police Department has a pretty good engagement program that they use. We kind of piggyback on that because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's always use the options that are there. It's just important to make sure that you're providing those services to everyone and that you're listening to everything. One of the things that I've always told as a supervisor, I tell all my officers at the beginning of every shift that I start leading is, you have to treat people like you would expect an officer to treat members of your own family. People don't always understand what we do. You have to be able to explain to them what you do. And you should never be scared of what you're doing. You should never be worried about that person with a camera. Because if you're doing your job the right way and you're exposing the values of the department, you're not doing anything wrong, and you're something people can emulate and look up to.
Thank you, Mr. Marithu. Now, Mr. Greg Gonzalez, how would you improve police-community relations?
Well, I think we have a pretty good model what we're doing in Omaha right now, and you need to be able to measure success. And I think one of the measures, the barometer we use, is look at our crime rate, and look at it really starts with getting yourself embedded in the community with clergy, with community organizations, attending meetings, and really having a workforce that looks like the community we serve. So whenever I commanded the unit, I made sure it was a priority that my workforce reflected the diversity of the community. When I was in homicide, there are times people aren't going to talk to you unless, one, you speak the same language or you look like the community you serve. And so why? Because people feel comfortable around you, right? So I'm very proud of the fact that the Omaha Police Department, over the past several years, has had diverse classes because we want our officers to look like the community we serve. And it starts right there. That's not anecdotal, that's scientific evidence that's working across the United States. And the other piece of that is, we police and we work with organizations to make sure we start with our youth. And whether it's the Step Up program with Willie Barney, we work with Willie at the Police Athletic League to make sure opportunities for our young folks to have employment opportunities, to keep them off the street at the busiest and most vulnerable times after school. And that's that same premise with our Police Athletic League. It was touched on the fact that we allow officers to coach. Not every police chief was receptive to that. To the chief's credit, he allowed our officers to coach on duty. There's no better form of community policing, absent a shooting or something going on, to work with youth and families in our community. And then you look at our crime stats. One of the measures we looked at was our citizens' complaints. bias-based policing, where we having officers out there. We want to look and see, are those complaints going out? What do those surveys look like in the community? When we're talking and communicating with community leaders, it's important because they're giving feedback, right? And I tell everybody that everybody has a seat at the table. If we have activists in the community, I don't care if you like them or not, everybody should have a seat at the table, elected officials. That doesn't mean that they're going to run our department, but I guarantee you they're going to have a voice. And we talk about working as a community. The sheriff works for the people. And that's the beauty about this position. If you don't like the sheriff, vote him or her out. And if they're not working for the people, and they're not making the community safer, and they don't have a workforce that works hard for the community, then you have a problem. So I commit to you as sheriff, I will do that.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And now we move to question number 4, panel. Question number 4, what are your short-term, 1 to 2 years, and long-term, 4 to 5 years, goals for the Sheriff's Department? Again, what are your short-term, in terms of 1 to 2 years, and long-term, 4 to 5 years, goals for the Sheriff's Department? And we will begin with Mr. Hudson.
Thank you. As far as short-term goals, right now, we have a situation where we are the 6th lowest paid agency in the metropolitan area, okay? And that is nothing that the administration of the department has put in a hole. The pay is a contractual issue that's negotiated between the union and the county government. That, for the longest time, we were told that the sheriff could not have a voice in that. Recently, we were told that is no longer true. So for the first short-term goal is we have to increase the deputies' pay. Right now, we are being used as what's called comparable agencies. Well, we're not competing against our comparable agencies. We are competing against our competing agencies. Omaha Police, Bellevue, Papillion, those agencies. So what we have to do is increase the pay and benefits for our deputies so that we can attract and retain good quality qualified candidates. Okay? The other thing that we have to do is short-term is, again, increase community engagement. Increase community engagement. We want the entire Douglas County to know that we're open. We want the entire Douglas County to know that we want them to come into our department, to be employed through us. When we increase community engagement, it leads to my next item, which is increasing diversity. Our department do not reflect the community. And it's not all our fault. It is a strict law, Nebraska law, that says we can only hire amongst the top 3 individuals. So in my next 1 or 2 years as sheriff, I have talked to Senator Justin Wayne, and he's going to introduce the bill next legislative session to tweak that law so that we can have a bigger pool that we can look at. That is how we're going to diversify our department. Now, when we look at 4 to 5 years down the road, we're looking at, again, increasing the pay and benefits. We're looking at having a better mental health response so that, I tell people all the time, mental illness is not a criminal issue. It's not a criminal issue. It's a health issue. So we as law enforcement officers, we are not trained properly to respond to individuals that have serious mental health issues. So in my 4 to 5 years, I will ensure that we have 24-hour coverage, 7 days a week, so that we can respond to cases of mental illness. The other thing I'm gonna get real quick is 4 to 5 years is change the disproportionate number of minorities in our criminal justice system. But I'll cover that in one of my other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And now, Mr. Merrithew, what are your short-term, 1 to 2 years, and long-term, 4 to 5 years, goals for the Sheriff's Department?
I agree with a lot of the short-term goals that Mr. Hudson spoke about, and obviously his big one is pay for deputies, and that's a huge one, I think, for all of us at this table. We have to make sure that we're not losing officers to the other agencies around Douglas County and within Douglas County because of pay discrepancies. So we've got to get that pay to match the areas. What Chief Deputy Hudson was talking about is the comparables are set by the Court of Industrial Relations. So that is kind of the way pay is structured in Omaha for public servants. So we have to look at something to make that more comparable. The Omaha Police Officers Association did this before. They did it by showing that Omaha isn't just the same as cities of the same size, and with police departments the same size. We started looking at working conditions, the amount of crime, the number of gang units, and all of those types of things. So that's an innovative way that we need to make sure that we're looking at. Douglas County isn't just the same as other sheriff's departments that are the same size as it. It's the same or has to reflect the working conditions in Douglas County. So that's one of the short-term goals. Diverse hiring is something that is very important to me, making sure that our sheriff's department reflects our community, and that's the entire community, the whole county in Douglas County. The other big thing that we've all talked about is community engagement, and that's something that I want to bring in right away. One of the first things I want to do is make sure that the PACE program is fully supported by the sheriff's department. Other quality programs that we look at would also be supported so that deputies know that's a focus of the sheriff, so that they know that if they bring something to me that I'm not aware of and say, hey, this is a great outreach program, I'm going to support them in that. And making sure that that is a core value of our department. Long term, I want to look at more efficiency. I want to see exactly where money is being spent in the department. The only way to do that is from the inside. So I want to make sure that I know exactly where we're spending our money and that we're spending it appropriately, that we're not duplicating services, that we're not doing the same thing that Omaha is doing, when it would make more sense for us to partner with Omaha than to try and do it all on our own. The other big thing is, and Wayne touched on that as well, is mental health. We need to make sure that we're fully engaged with Region 6. We need to make sure that we have the same thing for our patrol officers that Omaha has, and that is a mental health professional on call 24 hours a day so that they can respond to the incident with the deputies when they go on that call. Part of that is we have to work with 911 to make sure that their dispatchers are trained so that they know about it and can make sure that happens. Other big thing that I want to make sure legislative is expediting law enforcement transfers from other jurisdictions, and we need to change the state laws on that. So that will be a long-term goal as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merrithew. And now, Mr. Gonzalez, what are your short-term, 1 to 2 years, and long-term, 4 to 5 year goals for the Sheriff's Department?
Well, we've talked a little bit about it tonight. The Sheriff's Office, like some other agencies, are hemorrhaging on deputies leaving. And so, you know, when you call 911, you expect deputies or police officers to show up. So first and foremost, you have to hear from your deputies and command staff, right? So day one is forming an office, a sheriff's council, respected leaders in the rank and file. So from patrol officer all the way up the chain, we need to develop a committee and really get down and talk about the real issues at the sheriff's office. I'm going to tell you right now, the men and women at the sheriff's office, there's relatively no crime. They're already doing a fantastic job. So for the next sheriff, I think part of their job is easy because we're not talking about driving down violent crime necessarily. We're talking about driving down property crimes. But what wasn't touched upon is they've lost 9 to 10 deputies, maybe more in the past few years. I've hired more than 6, 7. And so if you do the math and you quantify what they're losing, it's well over $1 million in the workforce. And so the next sheriff, I will go in there and make sure that we start an aggressive plan on improving retention and recruitment of deputies, because we need to be able to retain the deputies. Reducing crime, the deputies do a great job right now. So that's in their wheelhouse when you address sex trafficking and a lot of those areas that need to be addressed. We'll work well with our federal and our local partners and make sure we continue to drive down crime. Because I think it's a three-pronged approach. And lastly is really step up community engagement. That's an ongoing process that starts day one and continues throughout your career. But if we don't continue to move the needle forward on law enforcement to make sure we retain, I feel I'm confident that I have a good recipe for success. and you have to have competitive wages. Police officers don't come into the profession to be rich, but they expect to be paid fair market value wages, to have a great culture to work in. And even though wages don't mean everything, they expect to come to work and like going to work. So that culture needs to continue to improve so we can retain deputies. And so as your next sheriff, I want to make sure that the sheriff's office is relevant and that they continue to stay at the sheriff's office. So I appreciate that question.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And now, Mr. Hanson, what are your short-term, 1 to 2 years, and long-term, 4 to 5 years, goals for the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, a lot of similar themes. Number one, as many of the gentlemen up here said, I think all of them, we do have to address the issue of compensation and wages and benefits for the deputies. It is below market average, not only in the Omaha metropolitan area, but especially against their direct competitors. My experience as chief bargainer for the Omaha Police Officer Association for many years gives me unique insight into not only peace officer wages and benefits and competitive levels of those, and recruitment and retention, intricacies of how that interplays with bringing good people here, but it also has taught me the realities when it comes to negotiations. Chief Hudson had mentioned that he just found out recently that he had more tools at his disposal than he had recently thought that he thought he had previously. And I believe him when he says that. And that's because I think there's been a status quo in county government, not necessarily in the sheriff's office, but amongst some of the negotiation side, on the civilian leadership side, where they said, well, it's just always the way we've done it, we can't change it. The thing about state labor laws is it's a minimum, it's not a maximum. So we can always pay deputies as much as we need. I will tell you, again, short term, body cameras. I will go to the community. There are funders out there, both public and private, that I believe will jump at the opportunity to implement a fully implemented body camera program within the sheriff's office. I also agree that we do need to increase our mental health, our focus on mental health. I do want to add at least one deputy, and again, I think this could be grant funded, as well as additional civilian co-responders to the effort that the Omaha Police Department is currently doing in their core unit, which is essentially their full-time behavioral mental health unit. Those mental health issues don't stop at the city border. Long term, one more thing on short term, recruitment. I was one of a small handful of law enforcement leaders recently that actually pushed and successfully achieved passage in the legislature a bill that will streamline and make it easier and more efficient to transfer a law enforcement certificate from another state to Nebraska. That will give us more access to experienced, diverse workforce. Long term, I want to specialize the sheriff's office to make sure it's being a good partner, not duplicating what OPD does, but working companion as a partner to OPD to continue to reduce violence and crime in our community and to continue to problem solve, ending poverty and cycles of poverty and crime. Again, through appropriate supervision, service to the courts, supervising high-risk repeat offenders in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
My understanding, we have a 45-second rebuttal that we can use.
Each candidate has a 45-second
I'd like to use
rebuttal.
45-second rebuttal.
That's for the audience. It's written right on the sheet.
Yeah, that's how the instructions begins.
I'm sorry, what is a discussion?
The 45-second rebuttal. When is that allowed?
The 45-second rebuttal is for the next time a question is asked, when we start with the questions from the audience. It'll be 45 seconds of your answering time. Okay. All right. Ms. Merrithew, you all right?
I'm great.
Okay, great. All right, this is the 5th question, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Merrithew. What are the 1 to 2 greatest challenges facing the sheriff's office, and how do you plan to address them? And gentlemen, for this last question, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. What are the 1 to 2 greatest challenges facing the sheriff's office, and how do you plan to address them? Mr. Meredith.
I think we've covered that to a certain extent. I think all four of us have said that the greatest issue is wages and compensation, fair compensation for the deputies, because we're going to continue to lose deputies to the other jurisdictions if we don't do that. So we need to absolutely get on that right away. That's extremely important. How am I going to address that? As an attorney, I'm trained to see both sides of every issue. So I've got to go up and convince the county board, because that's one thing that we've all kind of gotten away. Yeah, the sheriff's responsible to the voters and he's responsible to the community, but he has no taxing authority. So he's also beholden to the county board to be able to get the increases that he needs, to be able to get the information and the wages up. Because if you can't convince the board, you're not getting the money. So that's one of the big things that I would do, is make sure that I have a good working relationship with the county board, to make sure that they understand we have to budget properly for those necessities, because competitive wages are an absolute necessity. The other biggest challenge, I think, is the engagement. And when I say that, I think the deputies right now engage very well in their patrol areas, because they've got a little bit more time. They have the ability to do that. They're not rushing call to call to call like a lot of the Omaha police officers are. So they have a little bit more time. But they're not getting the whole county. We need to make sure that we're opening that engagement to the entire county, that we're making sure our deputies have the ability to, and the time to get in and engage with the communities on all parts of the county. So North Omaha, South Omaha, we need to make sure that we're engaged. And I think those are the two biggest issues that we need to address right away. And doing those and taking care of those, I think, opens up our visibility to the rest of the county, to make sure everyone knows who we are. And it also shows our deputies, you're important to us and we want to keep you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meredith. Mr. Gonzalez, what are the 1 to 2 greatest challenges facing the sheriff's office, and how do you plan to address them?
Well, like we talked a little bit about, really the number one priority is going to be being able to come in there with a comprehensive approach and improve retention and hiring of deputies. Because when you look at the cost, it's costing taxpayers money. They have about a $20 million budget, and so the next sheriff has to have that ability to go in there and critically look at how you're going to continue to make the department efficient and be able to address the issue of fair market value wages. And so we talked, when I was the last 9 years, we talked a little bit about the platform and what we will do. I can tell you that I've already done it in Omaha. What we did was we beefed up our background unit. So we talk about that rule of 3, that sometimes, you know, one could argue there's some discriminatory practices toward people of color in hiring. So you have to make sure, which I've already done, make sure you have a workforce and enough background investigators to be able to track down that list. Because not everybody's a great test taker. So you have to make sure that you can find that diamond in the rough regardless of where they are on the list. So that's number 1. And lastly, it's really step up that community engagement piece, as we talked about before. So there's awareness of who the sheriff's office is, to make sure that those deputies are relevant and that they are embraced to want to stay at that office, because they need a sheriff's office, right? We need our law enforcement officials to be relevant and interested in staying in the profession. And I'm committed that I will get those 2 done.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Hanson.
Thank you. Obviously, very similar themes. Recruitment and retention is one of the number 1 goals that has to be achieved. We have to solve that, because if we don't have deputies that have good morale or don't feel as if they can raise their family in dignity in our community, you know, unfortunately, we have to be concerned about the service to the public at that point. I do know that when police professionals have good morale and feel that they're being treated with respect and fairness and dignity, you do see a better service to the public. So obviously the way we solve that is to address those unfair inequities when it comes to their wages and their benefits for deputies compared to their comparables in the area. Secondly is the relevancy of the sheriff's office when it comes to being an effective component, effective partner for the Omaha Police Department in reducing violence and crime and trying to find better outcomes. It's interesting that City of Omaha residents, they pay full property taxes to the City of Omaha and to the county. If you live in unincorporated Douglas County, you only pay your property tax portion of the county. And so I think that's important. We have to make sure that we are giving a service to the citizens of Omaha who pay for both of those mill levies. And I think the best way we do that is we increase the sheriff's office activities and roles which are made for them per statute. Again, helping and beefing up in that service to the courts to supervise these high-risk offenders. It's just a small number of them that cause so much havoc and crime in our community. Not only will it keep us safer, but it'll help those individuals to rehabilitate, which will make us safer long-term.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Now, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you. One or two challenges for the sheriff's office. I'm going to clarify something real quick here. When I mentioned earlier about the pay and benefits and the sheriff being involved in the contract, that was a county attorney opinion that said the sheriff cannot get involved in the contract negotiations between the union and the county. It's not a sheriff decision. It wasn't something we automatically just found out that we could do. It was a county attorney's opinion. That's where experience mattered with the agency. That's how you would know that. As far as the number one challenge, it would be the pay and benefits. Now, recently, we did have 8 deputies, I think it was, that was applying for other agencies. We were able to do certain things on our agency. For example, I think we are the only agency right now, law enforcement-wise, who are providing some financial assistance to our deputies per hour because of COVID. Well, that stopped a lot of the bleeding. Instead of 8, we had 2 that went to the Omaha Police Department. So we are working closely with the county attorney, with the county board, and with the union on getting a foundation on what the essential pay should be for a deputy. Now, we're not asking the county board to put our pay the same as Omaha Police because of the number of crimes that they have in their community. But since we are responding to certain similar crimes and we're responding together, we're asking to be within a certain percentage of the Omaha Police Department. And I think we'll be able to achieve that. And then you will see that stop in individuals that is going to Omaha. Now, we're going to still lose those individuals that want the bigger agency. We lost one individual recently here because his father and his uncle was on the Omaha Police Department. There's nothing we can do about that. We are a good agency. We're an accredited agency. As far as relevancy, we are relevant. So when Sheriff Dunning took over, we increased the sworn positions in our department by 50%. A department that's not relevant wouldn't do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And now we will move to questions from the audience. But before I do that, I want to know from the candidates if you can stay an additional 15 minutes over the time we prescribed to answer the questions from the audience. I'm getting thumbs up. I'm getting the nod. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Consensus. The time for the response to the audience questions is 3 minutes. I'm going to start with, 1 minute. 1 minute. You're going to stay 15 minutes longer. 1 minute. Is that all right, gentlemen? You clear? 1 minute response. We're going to stay 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. The first question is directed to Mr. Gonzalez. How will you address gender equity, gender equality in the promotion and development of a better and more unified sheriff's department? Again, Mr. Gonzalez, how will you address gender equality in the promotion and the development of a better and more unified sheriff's department?
Well, my wife's a police captain, so I don't think you're going to get much argument out of me that women in law enforcement are a priority, and your workforce needs to be very representative of your workforce, right? And so I've already made some steps along my career. When I was a traffic unit lieutenant, I was the first lieutenant, I'll say, to have the courage to put a female on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. That was not a popular decision, but men and women alike are qualified to do this job. And I will tell you that I will continue to make sure that not only is our workforce reflective of women in policing, but we make sure that there's training opportunities for women in policing and that women have the same opportunities for advancement. And I can tell you that I've been a pioneer in that way. And I stand next to my wife 100% in all the endeavors that women have to endure in policing at times professionally. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And here is another question specifically for this time, Mr. Hudson, from the audience. What specifically have you done to increase diversity in the sheriff's department?
Very good question. What have I done to increase diversity in the sheriff's office? Well, first thing I've done is we have to have what's called a recruitment plan. If the sheriff department numbers do not reflect the community, our national standard says we must have a robust recruitment plan as to how we're going to get there. So what did I do? I increased money in the budget from the sheriff's office to ensure that we can reach out to different parts of the community. So this last time, what you saw was advertising on buses that went through North and South Omaha. You've seen us reach out to churches. You've seen us go to different forums. You see us go to those different places where we can be around the most minorities as possible to try to get them to apply for our agency. The other thing we found out was minorities were having problems passing the test. We brought in a minority consulting company, and they did test prep and interview prep. This last test we did, 50% was minority and female. It works. We have a proven track record of how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Now, gentlemen, the next two questions are for each of you to answer. First, and we will start with Mr. Merrithew. We will start with you. Okay? Sports aside, how will you unite the four corners of the county, north, south, east, and west?
It's a good question, and I think the biggest way to do that, again, is through the engagement, making sure that deputies are participating in community activities, Cinco de Mayo, Juneteenth, Native Omaha Days, making sure that we're there, making sure we're there at Elmore Days, making sure that we're at Benson Days, making sure that we are there when something happens, when a community event is going on. So to unite everything, we make sure people are there. The other thing that I think we can do is make sure that we're letting the other areas of the community know about those events and making sure that we're encouraging people from all areas of Omaha to attend those events in all the different precincts and all the different areas of Omaha and of Douglas County.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gonzalez?
Okay. All right, sorry about that. All right, so I think
you
about...
read the question again?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Give me a minute. Well, as a phone call with this.
Sports aside, how will you unite the four corners of the county, north, south, east, and west?
Well, I won't mention sports, but I will say that we do serve 38 zip codes. I'm a byproduct, of course, of Boys and Girls Club, and you know there's one in every corner of this city. And I could tell you that through a lot of different activities, regardless of sports, unite folks in our community. But I think it's important that we recruit from four corners of our city. And there's always been this kind of weird dividing line north and south that's always irritated me, which is why we made sure where there was capital improvement plans for activities from Miller Park to Christie Heights. As we move northwest and southwest, we don't discriminate regardless of gender. We want every kid or race, ethnicity to participate in activities, and we do activities with PACE outside of sports, whether it's ACT, planning, or even we're doing a trades program planning with Metro this summer. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Hanson, sports aside, how will you unite the four corners of the county, north, south, east, and west?
Great question. Well, we have a very diverse county, north, south, east, and west. But one thing that I really want to focus on as an entire community, and I think one thing that everybody is passionate about, and from across every corner of the county, is our young people. They want to make sure that our young people are healthy. They want to make sure that our young people are successful. And they want to make sure that our young people are being given a platform of support in our public school systems so that they have the best ability to be successful and be productive and live a life in dignity with their own family in the future. And so I think that is really, it's our children, and a discussion about what happens in our schools and how successful our schools are doing at preparing our young people to be contributing members of society, healthy, happy adults when they graduate. I think that's really where we'll get our biggest gains as a community, because that's what we have most in common. We all are passionate and love our children.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. And now, Mr. Hudson, sports aside, how will you unite the four corners of the county, north, south, east, and west?
Very good question. So one thing we have to do is we have to be more intentional about holding forums throughout Douglas County and invite different parts of the community to these different forums. There's issues going on in West Omaha that you may or may not hear. There's issues going on in South Omaha, Midtown, North Omaha. But bringing these individuals together to talk about the different issues in different communities, that will break down a lot of the barriers. Another good prime organization that's doing that right now is Omaha 360. Kind of expand Omaha 360, which is a bunch of nonprofits and different organizations and law enforcement that come together to talk about issues. The one that I attend is specifically for North Omaha. Expand that to all of Douglas County. Let's have Omaha 360, truly 360 throughout Douglas County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And now, the next question is for Mr. Hanson and Mr. Hudson. In alpha order, Mr. Hanson first. During your time in law enforcement, what are you most proud of? During your time in law enforcement, what are you most proud of?
Great question. I've done a lot of very interesting police work. I've had a lot of high liability, high risk jobs. But what I'm most proud of is the young men that I have mentored from a gang lifestyle or a prison lifestyle into a skilled trade lifestyle. Witnessing young men transitioning from a life of poverty and crime, building their soft skills, building their life skills, building their labor-ready skills, and seeing them flourish as a bricklayer or a laborer or a truck driver. That is really the pinnacle of my law enforcement career, because I know that's the ultimate answer to truly solving not only crime, but poverty in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. And now, Mr. Hudson, during your time in law enforcement, what are you most proud of?
I think think what I'm most proud of is the impact that I have, again, like Mr. Hanson said, is the impact on the youth in our community. To see them, when I go up to them on the weekends, on my time off, and we're talking, we're socializing, and they're real apprehensive when I first pull up on them. But within 15, 20 minutes of talking to these young kids, engaging with them, now they don't want me to leave. To the point where when I go back in that neighborhood and they see me again, now they're waving me down. Before, they're going a different direction. To go and have these conversations and to hear one of these young kids say, you know what, I guess you guys aren't all that bad. I guess you're not all that bad. Then I knew that I had made an impact on this young kid's life. And it's a group of them. To see them talking around, standing around, which they would never do any other time, that's let me know that I'm getting through to them. That's the greatest impact. And being a mentor for the 100 Black men, where I have 2 mentees, because I know they need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. The next question is for Mr. Gonzalez. There are 2 questions. One, how are you able to lead this department without having an FBI clearance?
Well, I'm here. I graduated. I'm a graduate of the FBI National Academy. So I was a task force officer part of my career. And for the last 9 years, I've been an assistant police chief at the city of Omaha. So if I need an FBI clearance, I certainly will get one. But that's never been part of my current duties. And like I said before, I have no problem. I've never had any discipline in my career and my history. I welcome that question because there was, I didn't want to have to, in the good Lord's church, I didn't want to have to mention that today. So I'm going to keep this very vanilla. I'll stand by my record any day of the week in my career. And one doesn't survive in law enforcement and keep promoting at this rank. I rub elbows with POTUS events and do the things that I've done without having high character. But thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez.
I'd like to do a 45-second rebuttal on that, if I may.
When it's your time to answer next, you can give 45 seconds of your response to the rebuttal.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The next question is for all of you. So, Mr. Merrithew, 45 seconds of that minute you can rebut. The question is, do you feel it is important that the individual seeking this position live in the county where you have lived in the last 10 to 15 years? We'll start with Mr. Merrithew.
Yes. Yes. And I've lived, since I've been on the Omaha Police Department, I've lived in the city of Omaha and Douglas County. Moved here for law school back in 1992 and then lived here ever since.
Okay, now you want to do
Yes,
the
I do.
rebuttal, sir?
The issue of security clearances, that's a national security check. No one has one of those done unless somebody asks them a lot of questions. I've had one of those since I was 18 years old, a secret security clearance. So that's 38 years that I've had one. Now, I don't have a top secret security clearance because I don't need one. And Mr. Gonzalez is correct. Unless you need one, you don't get one.
Thank you, Mr. Merrithew. Mr. Gonzalez, same question. Do you feel it is important that the individual seeking this position live in the county where you have lived for the past 10 to 15 years?
Well, you know what? The requirement is once you're elected to live here, born and raised in South Omaha, the short answer is yes when you're elected. I worked undercover narcotics and I lived in South Omaha. And it wasn't until I did a search warrant on my neighbor's house that I had to protect my family. We moved to Sarpy County to follow our priest, Father Damien of St. Columkill. So we currently live in Sarpy, purchased a house in the county, and we're excited to get back to Douglas County. I can tell you the value is not where I sleep at night. judge me by what I do in the day and what I've done for the citizen of this community. And I will put my record up with anybody, but thank you for that question, because we are gladly moving back to Douglas County. And I have friends corner to corner of this county. So I thank you very much for that question. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Hanson.
Is it working? The state law is pretty clear, as Chief Gonzalez said, that once elected, a sheriff has to reside in the county. And I think they do that for a reason. I had never envisioned running for sheriff up until a little more than a year ago. I just sold my house in Sarpy County. I've spent the last few days moving into an apartment with my wife and my 4 kids, actually 2 apartments. That's the only way you can fit 4 kids into a new place. Our house is set to be complete in late June. I think the reason why the legislature passed that statute was because they didn't want to miss out on great candidates that have committed a career towards a community just because they live a few blocks east or a few blocks south of one county line or another. And so I think it's important that you're committed to the community. That should be what the community looks at the most, not necessarily where you sleep every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. And Mr. Hudson, the same question. Do you feel it is important that the individuals seeking this position live in the county where you have lived for the past 10 to 15 years?
I'll take my 45 seconds and answer the top secret clearance question real quick, then I'll go back to that one.
Okay.
It is important that a law enforcement executive have a top secret clearance. That way you can go and listen to your federal partners on what's going on a local level and on a national level, bring that back to your department and ensure that you can protect the community. I have my top secret. I submitted my information, got it all done, so I went through the entire process. So on day 1, I can do that. As far as the living requirement, it is important. You should live in the community in which you want to serve. You're here to protect and serve the community, so therefore you should be a part of the community and not apart from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And now we have a question from someone who is viewing online, all inclusive. The question, we're going to start with Mr. Merrithew, okay? Hypothetical situation, gentlemen. I'm a high school senior. Convince me to apply for Douglas County Sheriff.
Well, you have to wait 3 years. You got to be 21 to be a law enforcement officer. So what I would convince that person of is the importance of a really good foundation and good education. Now there's 2 ways to really kind of do that. There's the real world education, and then there's the school education. Depending on the person, if they're academically inclined, I would encourage them to go to college for 4 years. UNO's got one of the best criminal justice programs in the country, and that's a great way to get the foundation for learning how to do law enforcement. On top of that, if they're not so academically inclined, going to the military for 4 years is a great way to get the background and the discipline and the training that you need for law enforcement. I just want to add one further thing on the security clearances. You just don't get a top secret security clearance unless you're in a position where you have to have it. I've never had one as a judge advocate. I've been called into multiple times into TSSCI situations and been given a interim clearance for the information I needed because I needed it. But if you've got an NACD, National Agency certification, getting a top secret security clearance is as quick as calling them and saying, I need it, and they change your security clearance. So it's not super difficult. And
Thank you.
Mine was just updated 2 years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, same hypothetical situation. I'm a high school senior. Convince me to apply for Douglas County Sheriff.
Not met the senior, I would tell you exactly, you do need to be 21, and I would tell everybody that law enforcement is a very rewarding career. And I consider it blue-collar work. You know, my dad was in the Air Force. My brother was a police captain. Obviously, my wife's a police captain. And I have two brothers that were veterans of war. And I consider it hard work for the community. It's a good way to serve your community if you love working for people. And the easiest way that I can explain is to put food on the table for me and my family. For the last 28 years, I love my two sons and my daughter to go in law enforcement. And I would tell everybody it's one of the most rewarding jobs on the job because you're dealing with people at their worst possible moment sometimes. And you can come in and save the day. And it doesn't always have to be a negative encounter. So if you want good wages and good benefits that will put food on the table and you enjoy going to work and doing something different every day, be a police officer or a deputy for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Hanson.
I've had this conversation with many young high school students, but I think hitting even closer to home, I've had this conversation with my 19-year-old son and my 17-year-old daughter. She's a junior in high school. My 19-year-old son wants to be a firefighter, so I don't know what to say about that. I tried. My 17-year-old daughter, she wants to follow her father's steps into law enforcement. And she knows, and she sees it every day, and I explain it to her as much as I can, that I love going to work every day. I love it just as much today, with 25 and a half years on the job, as I did as a 23-year-old officer right out of the academy. If you want to be able to serve your community, if you want to have positive impact on your community, and if you want to be able to raise your family in dignity, there is no better job than law enforcement, especially in the Omaha and Douglas County area.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Hudson, convince me to apply for the Douglas County Sheriff. I'm a high school senior.
Very good question. First of all, I would have a conversation with that young person, again, let them know that they have to be 21. But there's things that they can be doing now to prepare themselves. But the one thing I would tell that young child is, it's a noble profession. It's a noble profession. But you have to have a caring heart. The other thing I would tell them is, don't believe what you see on TV. All the car chases and all that stuff, no. You are a guardian to your community, not a warrior. You're a guardian 98% of the time, and warrior maybe 2% of the time. Then I would bring that individual to the department, show them around the department, and then introduce them to the cadet program that I will be starting on my department, where we go from high school to Metro Community College to a work study program with my agency, then future employment. That's how we grow our own. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for addressing the questions from the audience. And now, we will give you 2 minutes to give your closing statements. I'm going to begin with Mr. Gonzalez. Closing statement.
Seems like I'm always first. All right, well, thank you again for the invite tonight. I'm honored to be here. I'll keep this rather short. Judge me by my 28 years of law enforcement experience with an impeccable record. I've worn both uniforms, the Douglas County Sheriff's uniform and OPD. I have executive level experience of 9 years, and I've been at management over 20. And that means from sergeant all the way up, violent crime units, even organizing POTUS events with the President of the United States when I was a lieutenant of the traffic unit. I worked on violent crime task forces, and I work with people. And that's why I'm applying for this job, because I want to work with you. And it's your vote that matters. You have to decide which candidate's going to be the best up here for you and your family at night. When you call 911, when you start to move the needle on professionalism, I expect to be that sheriff for you, for the people. I want to thank all the deputies and police officers that have supported me along the way. I have the endorsement of the sheriff's office. I'm very proud of that. I will make you proud. I will make the community proud, and I will work for every corner of the city. And I will say that I'm born and raised in Omaha, and I have not applied for a chief's job like my opponent, who applied for a Waterloo, Iowa job 1 year ago. And it's interesting when people say they love this community and want to stay here. I'm committed to this county, so I expect to work for you, and I appreciate your time. Thank you. Love every vote.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Please. Mr. Hanson, your closing remarks, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I look at this opportunity to compete, to earn the honor of being your next sheriff as a win-win. I love my current job with the Omaha Police Department. It's the most rewarding thing, other than my children, it's probably the most personally rewarding thing in my life. And I love service to my community. And if you choose me as your sheriff, you are going to have a sheriff who's a compassionate problem solver, who's empathetic, but also a sheriff that really understands the reality of how public policy and state statutes and administrative rules truly impact real people's lives on the streets. Because that's the job that I do every day. I look forward to being your next sheriff. I'll be honored if you select me as your next sheriff. And I promise I'll put your family at just as level of value as I do my own.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Hudson.
Thank you. Community, what do you want to see? Do you want to see a sheriff that has a track record of being part of the community? Do you want to see a sheriff that is supportive of alternative criminal justice programs so that we can reduce the disproportionate number of minorities in the criminal justice system? Or a sheriff that subscribes to the antiquated lock them up philosophy? On May 10th, it will be your turn to let your voices be heard on what you want to see in your next sheriff. Do you want a guardian to our community, as stated by Plato's vision of a perfect society, which states, in a republic that honors the core of democracy, the greatest amount of power is given to those called guardians. Only those with the most impeccable character are chosen to bear the responsibility of protecting the democracy. As your next sheriff, I will ensure that all members of the sheriff's office are held to that impeccable character standard, to include myself. There will never come a time you will ever question my integrity, my honesty, my professionalism. But most of all, you will never question my commitment to this community from which I've honorably served for 26 years. We are one Douglas County. We are one community. May God bless you and may God keep you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Mr. Merrithew.
Thank you. That's something that I've always stood for, and I've been fighting for democracy since I was 17, and through the armed forces, that's something I've always done, and I continue to do there. The extension of that was as a police department, always have fought to make sure that we have a democracy, but the minority or the individual has to be respected, and they have to be protected at all times. I have the education as a Juris Doctorate and an attorney. I have the experience. I've been all over the world. I've been in every element. I've worked in almost every precinct of this. I have worked in every precinct of the city and in almost every bureau of the Omaha Police Department. I've been in the military for 38 years. In 1991, I was promoted to sergeant. I've been a supervisor of troops and a supervisor of people since 1991. 38 years of leadership experience. I'm all about fairness. The rules have to apply to everyone. The rules have to be fair for everyone. Fairness means accessibility. Fairness means making sure that the same rules apply to everyone. Unlike my opponent, I don't believe that there should be different rules for Second Amendment rights in Omaha versus the rest of the state of Nebraska. I believe in the same thing that Wayne said, making sure that we have the ability to have alternative treatments. Douglas County has the largest set of diversion programs in our courts of any county in Nebraska, period. We have veterans diversion, drug diversion, we have all kinds of diversion programs. And we want to make sure we're putting people into those programs so that they rehabilitate rather than go to jail. My integrity, my ethics, I'm an ethics instructor, they're above reproach. And if you bring that, that's the type of openness and professionalism that
Mr. Merrithew. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Hudson, Mr. Merrithew, and now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to give an applause for these candidates. We will have closing remarks and prayer.
Amen. As we get ready to close, just a couple things I want to share. Give me about another minute or two. But on behalf of the Baptist Pastors Ministers Conference, I want to double that thank you, as Sister Dr. Mitchell, Moderator, has done, to these gentlemen to stand next to time. That goes a long way in our book, to know that it tells what it tells us who are here tonight, that you're willing to answer questions from the audience. Now, to the audience, just want to let you know, we could not get to all there was a lot of good questions tonight, and we probably be here to about midnight, because they were that good, but we tried to pick just a few, just pulled them out and asked. So again, to the audience, we apologize when we get to all your questions at this time, but we're grateful for everyone that showed up tonight. Let me do this real quickly. Thank you to the Omaha community. You came out tonight to show your support, showed your concern about who's going to be the next sheriff in our community. And so by you coming out means a lot to not only to us, but also to all the candidates to show that you are concerned and your vote does matter. Let me take time to thank the Baptist Pastors Ministers Conference, all the preachers and clergy that make up that conference. Thank you tonight for supporting. Thank you to our team, the forum team that did all the work behind the scenes. I'm not going to call names in the interest of time. You know what you did to make this a grand success, and it definitely took a team effort. Amen. So we hope that you're pleased with our stay here, our hospitality when you came in. If you did not get treated right, please see Sergeant Finch, and he'll file a complaint with OPD, and they'll get back to us. But again, we are also, let me just get shout out. I want to especially thank, let's get her for our moderator, Dr. Carol Mitchell. I think I might send that ticket to CNN, Fox, MSB, all the networks. This is a true professional. Moderator, I think you got your calling tonight, Dr. Mitchell. I think you got your calling to be a moderator. That's all we got for you tonight. There is one announcement, I believe, on May 16th. We will be having, along with the IMA and the Baptist Pastors Conference on May 16th, an informational forum regarding property taxes. It'll be here May 16th at 7 p.m. Chris Rogers will be here to answer any community questions and find out what's going on, why our property tax, amen somebody, why our property tax, I don't know about yours, mine almost doubled. And so I'm sure yours almost hit too. And so we're going to be able to ask questions because Rogers kind of get some answers in regards to that as well. Yes, you have something? There's some literature on your way out they'll give you as well. The candidates literature you can get on your way out of the building if you choose to take some home tonight. Again, thank you. Let's get ready to go. Thank you, Sergeant Finch, and thank you that he didn't have to throw nobody out tonight. Somebody say amen. Let us stand and we'll have a word of prayer. Amen. This is how we do in church. We stand and have a word of prayer before we get out of here. Amen. Maybe fall, we ask the candidates to stick around. We'll take a quick picture, if that's okay with you guys. We'll take a quick picture of the conference, and then they'll be available, amen, as they leave, if they choose to. If they have time to stick around, they can just head to the fellowship hall, and then people can come ask questions if you have time to stick around. Father in heaven, we want to say thank you for this forum tonight. We want to ask your prayer and blessing and protection around these four individuals, Lord, that are vying for a very important part in our community. We pray, oh God, that they would be your guide, whoever you choose to select. We know all things work together for good to them who are called according to your purpose. That, Lord, whoever you choose to lead this community, that they would listen to you first. That they will guide with integrity, they will guide with honesty, they would guide as you would lead the people in all parts, as we've heard said, all parts of the city. And Lord, that we who are citizens would follow behind them and yet hold them accountable, but also support them so we can make our community, no matter who the leader is, that we can make our community better. So now we ask that you give us a traveling grace that we all travel home tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good night.
Remind you.